Mr. Kyle Bagnall has presented for us several times. Actually, the first time Kyle presented with us was, oh gosh, was that 2012, 16?
2014.
2014.
Yep.
Passenger pigeons. It was quite a while ago. So Kyle's been presenting for us for a long time, and we're thrilled to welcome him back tonight. So Kyle, I will let you take it away from there.
Great. Thank you, Beth. And thank you all for joining us, as she mentioned. My wife and I were in Arizona last week, and yes, it was warmer there, but I'm happy to be here so I can present this to you today. So I'm the park naturalist for Mackinac State Historic Parks. Started working there back in 1990 when I was a Fort Mackinac guide, and have just always been fascinated with the area ever since. Well, even before that, really. But today I'm going to share something special with you, and it's some of the more forgotten features of Mackinac. You'll see at the end there's an invitation to a bike ride that I do on the island in the summertime that's got the same theme, but this really gives quite a lot more detail and pictures and things like that that you can't see when we go on the bike ride. So here are three of the features that we're going to be talking about today. And as you'll see here once I get going, well, here's what they look like today. So, and those are just three of them we're going to talk about as we move along here. So, the features of Mackinac Island are world renowned. We know things like Arch Rock, Sugarloaf, which is in the center of the island, and Skull Cave, which are some of the early and most famous ones. The whole Straits of Mackinac area is made of limestone bedrock, and much of this limestone is very special. It's brecciated limestone, which is in ancient times been cracked into millions of pieces and re-cemented. So these are hard formations that are left behind. Over the last 10,000 years, as the glaciers left the area and the Great Lakes levels went up and down, it sculpted these formations in these shapes that we know, including this cave opening here. Really, for many years, the Mackinac Straits area, even though we had these formations, no one really talked about them or wrote about them. The first mention that we've been able to find of any of these kind of special geological formations in particular was in this newspaper, the Columbian Sentinel, in Massachusetts. And it was an article that appeared in January 15th, 1803, written by this man. This is Dr. Francis LeBaron. He came to Mackinac Island in the fall of 1802 to become the doctor at Fort Mackinac, and he wrote a letter back home in which he mentioned some of these natural curiosities of Mackinac. So his letter says, the curiosities of this place consist of two natural caves. One of them is formed in the side of a hill, which is Skull Cave. The other in a pyramidical rock of 80 feet in height. And there's a picture I've taken of Sugarloaf with a cave in the side. There are also two natural arches of the Gothic order, which appear to have been formed by some convolutions in nature. One is 80 feet in height, that's Arch Rock on the left, and the other is 40, and that's a sketch of Fairy Arch, which we'll talk quite a lot about today. So those are some of the highlight features, and these are ones we have not really forgotten by and large. This map here from 1817 is really one of my favorite maps of all time of Mackinac Island. And if you zoom in, you'll see that these three of these features are on here. Arch Rock, Sugarloaf Rock near the top, and then Skull Rock, they call it on the lower left, or Skull Cave. This is the first time any of these features were depicted on a map. And you can also see some large clearings, which some farming and things are going on in odd places of the island that we don't have clearings today. In fact, few writings scattered about in this early part of the 19th century include this from 1819 from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They said Mackinac contains several natural curiosities, immense rocks rising in the form of a pyramid, deep caves filled with human bones, and a very high and singular arch. The air is proverbially pure and healthy. They have a saying that no man dies here a natural death. So a little bit of an exaggeration, which is a common theme as well, but nevertheless kind of a delightful quote. So the fur trade wanes, and that's why Europeans were interested in this place in the first place. So the fur trade finally wanes at about 1840. And really, even before then, some tourism based on these articles that appear in newspapers and travel logs and whatnot really starts to catch on. And people flock to Mackinac Island. We become the second national park in the country in 1875, and we're a national park for 20 years. So 3 years after Yellowstone was created, Mackinac Island National Park is created. So it's a special year for us at the parks because we're celebrating the 150th year of the founding of the park. So we've got a whole series of programs going on, and I'll be leading some of those on the island this summer. So this is one of the early guidebooks that was published, actually by a lieutenant at the fort, called the Annals of Fort Mackinac. And here's the map that he had in that book. You can see there's a number of formations listed on here, like Robinson's Folly and Arch Rock, Sugar Loaf, Friendship's Altar, and Chimney Rock, and things like that. As time goes on, things get more and more detailed. So we also are no longer a national park, but in 1895, when the soldiers leave, the federal government shifts all that land over to the state of Michigan with promises that we will maintain it as a park for the benefit of the public. So we celebrated our 125th anniversary of that back in 2020. So 1895, we were Michigan's first state park, and we still are today. And as these guidebooks and tourist publications continue to be printed, more and more detail you'll see gets included and more features to explore. The granddaddy map of them all, with these features, was printed in 1916. This was the Michigan Historical Commission published this pamphlet, the names of places of interest on Mackinac Island, and it was accompanied by this map. A survey was done by the Mackinac Island State Park Commission, and it has 212 places of interest on there. Just every grotto and grove of trees and rock, everything was named. A lot of the names were just kind of picked out of the air, out of Michigan history, but there's many of these that we really don't celebrate anymore. Some of them were quite famous in their day. Some are still there, like Arch Rock, and others kind of just have faded away. So we're going to focus on just a few of these, which I showed you in the beginning here. And first, on the bottom right, you'll see there's a little box I put up. And you'll see Fairy Kitchen, Fairy Arch, Giant Stairway, and the Family Rock. So let's look at that little cluster over there near Mission Point and Robinson's Folly. So, Arch of the Giant Stairway, or Fairy Arch, was the second largest arch on Mackinac Island, and it is no longer there whatsoever. It's entirely gone, and you'll see why in a bit. This is actually an excellent picture of it. It was a magic lantern slide, so it's actually printed on glass, and it was hand colored, and it would have been done in a shown in one of these shows, similar to this version today on PowerPoint, but back in the day with a magic lantern. So Arch of the Giant Stairway or Fairy Arch is the same thing as you'll see. So what are we talking about? Here's a short description. A little to the north of Robinson's Folly may be seen an immense rock standing out boldly from the mountainside, near the base of which is a very beautiful little arch known as the Arch of the Giant's Stairway. This arch is well worth the trouble of a visit. So this arch was first described in 1803, the letter was written in 1802, and then it was kind of forgotten about for many years. And really what happened was that the vegetation grew up so greatly around the arch, it kind of hid it from view. But it really regained its fame in this book, Picturesque America. And if you've never heard of this, I highly recommend you look it up. It was edited by the famous author William Cullen Bryant, and it's one of two volumes. This is volume one that Mackinac appears in, and it aims to celebrate all these picturesque wonders of our country all across America. So the section about Mackinac, and it includes wonderful lithographs as well. They're very thick volumes. It was written by Constance Fenimore Woolson. So, in celebration of Women's History Month, I've included a number of women authors for you today as well. She is the grandniece of James Fenimore Cooper, a famous novelist, and she was a very famous novelist in her day as well. She wrote about Fairy Arch. She said, Fairy Arch is of similar formation to arched rock and lifts from the sands with a grace and beauty that justify the name bestowed upon it. And here's the lithograph of Fairy Arch in picturesque America. All of the features in picturesque America were somewhat exaggerated, but this is nevertheless a relatively accurate representation of it. Now, Constance Fenimore Wolfson spent a lot of time on Mackinac Island. She spent summers there. If you've ever been to Anne's Tablet, which is near Fort Mackinac, kind of up on the hill, on the east side of the fort, it's named after a heroine of one of her novels, Anne. The story partially takes place on Mackinac Island. She's got several of them that take place there, and this tablet was put up in the 19 teens in memory of her and her works, which are still really fun to read. So, with that being a wonderful advertisement, and of course the park, national park, had been was just about to be created when this painting was created in 1874. It just became a tourist destination, even though it was hard to get to. In fact, this original oil painting is on display on Mackinac Island in the Manugian Mackinac Island Art Museum, which is in the old Indian dormitory in Marquette Park. It's one of our sites from Mackinac State Historic Parks. It's one of the rare paintings out of Henry Chapman Ford. Most of his were done out west. It also became a popular stereopticon view. So this is one of the early ones from the national park days, and they called it Arch of the Giant Stairway here. So again, you put this in a stereoscope and you get to see the images in 3 dimensions. And in 1877, just 2 years after the national park was founded, a fascinating mystery was uncovered at Fairy Arch. So let's see what happened here. And this was printed in the Sheboygan newspaper on October 15th, 1877. And I just included some various views of the arch here as we go through it. A locality on this island known as the Fairy Arch has recently made a revelation full of mystery and perhaps of crime. This arch, until within a recent period, was known to but few of the citizens of Mackinac, being sealed by the trees and bushes, and was almost, if not wholly unapproachable from the waterside. A few days since, a gentleman stopping at Mission House, which was a hotel at that time, wished to visit this place and went there with some guides. While there, one of the guides discovered what appeared to be a human bone protruding from the earth and stones, and on further examination, a human body was discovered, which proved to be that of a woman. And from the position of parts of the body, it appeared to have been doubled up and crowded into a crevice or opening in the rock, and covered over with stones and earth. The earth gradually washed away and partially exposed the remains. And this photo by the Detroit Publishing Company, that ghost of a woman in the back, was added photographically. There's several copies of this. The person whose remains were found here is supposed to have been murdered, and her body concealed in this place, entering it through the opening at the top of the hill. The remains were collected and are in possession of one of our citizens. Time may disclose more with regard to them. So, this was in the Sheboygan Post and Tribune, October 15th, 1877. Today, of course, we know that was not a murder victim, but yet it was one of the many Native American graves found on Mackinac Island, a skull cave being the most famous example, and many other locations as well. In fact, nearly every geological formation on Mackinac Island was once a burial place for Native peoples, including the cave inside Sugarloaf and many others as well. So the remains kind of disappeared. We don't know what happened to them, but it does remind us of the sacred nature of Mackinac Island to Native peoples in our area. So the story was largely forgotten. And somehow, however, this woman here, Lorena Maybelle Page, who wrote this book, Legendary Lore of Mackinac, and self-published it in 1901. She was from Cleveland, Ohio. Now, the book is also largely forgotten, mainly because the Indian legends, so to speak, that she writes in here, most of them she fabricated. She just kind of made up poems and stories, tying together bits and pieces of other well-known stories. But it's actually kind of interesting to read a little bit between the lines, and she does refer to some actual events. So she writes about the fairy arch and the giant stair. And as part of that tale, she writes the skeleton on the stair. So she's referring to this event we just read about, which happened 25 years earlier. And this is the image of the giant stairway in the book that I just showed you. And you can't see the arch at all, it's all covered with trees. But she writes, many moons ago did the stranger white ascend the mighty steep, and gaining the ledge of the dizzy height, disturb my loved one's sleep. And they bore her away, I know not where, from the ledge in the rock-made giant stair. It just was a very popular spot. I have scrambled up the cliff at this location, and I'm shocked that everyone was able to do this back in the day. Here's a quote from 1918. It says, to visit Mackinac Island and fail to climb the giant stairway and view this beautiful handiwork of nature is to miss one of the leading features of the fairy isle. Here's the staff from Tootle College. Milton Tootle and his family had a cottage on the East Bluff. Here's some of his staff. They scrambled up there in those long skirts. And we keep talking about the giant stairway, so what is that? And how does it relate to the arch? So here's actually a great picture by Frank Kenyon, who was superintendent of the park. You cannot see the road, but it is hidden just beyond this front row of rocks here. But you'll see the giant stairway is this big rock formation in the back, and we'll talk more about that now. It was called that because it resembled giant steps. So they're called natural limestone steps of the giant size in the cliff leading to Fairy Arch. According to an old Indian legend, the giant fairies regularly ascended this stairway, stopping on each step to offer a prayer or make a new resolve. The very first mention of this that we're able to find was actually written in 1838 by Bela Hubbard. He was the primary assistant to Dr. Douglas Houghton, who was our first state geologist. They were actually surveying the entire shoreline of the Lower Peninsula in 1838, and they stopped on Mackinac Island. And this image is an early stereopticon slide from 1875. But Hubbard wrote about this base of this formation as follows. He said, below the arch rock, or south of it, and just north of Robinson's Folly, a projecting mass of rock has been hollowed out at the bottom in the form of a fireplace, to which the narrow buttress above presents no inaccurate representation of a chimney. We have never heard this spoken of, but thinks it deserves a name among the curiosities of the island. So this looks very much like Devil's Kitchen on the west side of Mackinac Island, and you'll see it was often referred to in a similar way. So here's 1847 now, and look at the boats up near the front here. And this you can start to see the steps. So this is from the Free Press, a little 2 days at Mackinac article. And they visited the giant steps on the beach about a half-mile from the mission house. It is composed of 3 rocks resembling steps. The first step being about 70 feet, and the other 2 steps being about 30 feet from one step to another. And artists could not have placed them better to resemble ordinary steps. In the rocks are caverns, and human bones are said to be found there. Our legs becoming somewhat weary, we did not venture to climb them. Look how inaccessible that is. So you'd have to land on this beach with a boat unless you scrambled along the shoreline. The water level was very high. And I was really interested to see that in 1847, they were even talking about bones being found there. Here's a great view from a little further back. This was sketched in 1890 or printed then. And you can see the cliff of Robinson's Folly in the background. And this is what Fairy Arch kind of looked like when the trees were kind of cleared away. This little article from 1852 mentions it and says there's the giant stairway made up of 3 or 4 great toppling rocks rising above each other to a tremendous height. They are rather difficult of ascent to ordinary mortals, but their giant builder probably tripped up with a hop, skip, and a jump after his ablutions in the lake below. But to be serious, the Manitou's Stairway would be a better appellation. All right, now I just put an arrow up on the left. We're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to go over here to this boulder that is on the very left side sticking out into the water and take a look from that location. Here's the big boulder right here. It's called Maiden's Rock or the Family Rocks because it was kind of easy to get to. So this guy kind of took a seat right here next to the water's edge. His feet are almost in the water. And again, we're just north of Robinson's Folly, so almost where the Mackinac Island State Park sign is today along the road. And right in the back, behind him, where that arrow is, that is the first step of the giant stairway. In fact, up near the top, you can see the top step up there on the hill as well. So here's why it's called Maiden's Rock. All these ladies were on a bike ride. They managed to make their way. There's no road at this time, and the water is very high, but they made their way over to pose there in front of Maiden's Rock. And in the background again, you can see the first step of the giant stairway. So if you climb over that, these folks did so, and they're sitting there at the base of the giant stairway. And if you're on Mackinac Island today, and you go around the shore, you will see you would be sitting, these people would be sitting right in the road that we are on today. And here's the road. So this is about 1900. The road went in little bits of stages, but it was basically completed by 1904. And you can see it goes right along the base of the stairway. And the road by 1915 gets a little bit bigger. Here's a shot from 1915 that's colorized. And we'll zoom in a bit. Now I'm going to show you a magic trick, so pay attention, folks. And it's the same exact location today. So I took this last fall. It took me several times to get let's do it again. So here's the view from 1915. And here's the view today. That entire bottom step, which included Ferry Arch, has melted away. It's gone. So what happened? So Ferry Arch was dynamited about 1949, and there's very scant written record about it. The only thing we've been able to find is they call it a misguided erosion control effort, which sounds a little like damage control for, oops, who let someone blow up Ferry Arch? But it was very close to the road, so perhaps rocks were tumbling down onto the road, and it was kind of difficult to keep people safe. The big rock you see on the left side is Robinson's Folly. So let's zoom in again. Whoop, went too fast. But here we're zooming in now, and you can see the part of Ferry Arch where Ferry Arch should be, right by the road there. There's Maiden's Rock and the location of Ferry Arch. And Maiden's Rock is still there. All right, now it's extremely thick and overgrown there now, but I scrambled up the bank. I only did this in the off season after the main tourist season. There are very few people on the Mackinac Island in November because I didn't want to knock any rocks down onto the road. But this is looking at the first part of the giant stairway, and that is where the arch should be on the right-hand side there. Again, it's no longer there because it was dynamited. And this is what the cliff looks like from the other side. And you can see how this bottom section is all smooth. That is part of where the arch should be connected to that. And this is looking straight onto it. So you can just see where that arrow is. That's the bottom step. There's the second step. And the third step is way up on the hill. All these trees have grown up. Actually, you'll see here in the last 40 years or so. So I managed to accidentally uncover this actually rather recently. It's from 1980. It was a Views of Mackinac Island book by Dale Fisher, a photographer. And here is where Ferry Arch should be. So I started coming to Mackinac Island as a Boy Scout in 1984 as part of the Mackinac Island Scout Service Camp. So we rode our bikes around the island. I'm sure we rode right past this location. And if you were back on the island in those days, I'm sure you could have seen it very easily as well. But today it's all grown up. So again, here's you can see the rocks above it as well, some of the other steps. But this is where it should be. And right in the corner there where the arrow is, that's Maiden's Rock, where those ladies were on their bike, and that man was sitting next to the water's edge. It's right near the water filtration plant today. There's a building there, and that filters the drinking water coming to Mackinac Island. All right, so that's Ferry Arch. It's sadly no longer there, but at least we can see where it was. And we do have some signage, especially up near the new Milliken Nature Center at Arch Rock, that talks a little bit about Ferry Arch. So now let's move to a cave. So we're going to head to Scott's Cave, which is on the northeast shore of the island. You'll see I've circled it here on this map for you. It was actually written about quite an early day as well. So this newspaper here is from 1845 in Boston. They called it Indian Cave at that point. And they said Indian Cave on the north side of the island, a little beyond Dousman's farm, is another object of interest. It will accommodate a large party standing erect under its vault. Those visiting it should take candles with them, for the lights will show off its rough walls to great advantage. This was the largest cave on Mackinac Island at one point, and a whole group of people could fit inside. The first image we have of it is actually this sketch, and it was drawn in 1853. We basically know the day it was drawn because it was drawn by this man, Alfred Waud. He became more famous in later days as a sketch artist during the Civil War. He visited many battlefields, and he would sketch scenes that would end up in Harper's Weekly and things like that, these newspapers. He came to Mackinac Island, though, in 1853 to visit his friend. And his friend, well, was Thomas Butler Gunn. And here's a self-portrait of Thomas Butler Gunn that he sketched also in 1853, the same year he was on Mackinac Island. His journal is in the collection of the Missouri Historical Society, and they've digitized it here and put it online. And he stayed on Mackinac Island, this Thomas Butler Gunn, for 2 months, visiting a friend of his who was actually a hospital steward at Fort Mackinac. So Thomas actually stayed at the fort. Alfred came to visit, and they had adventures. And one of their adventures was getting in a little boat, going around Mackinac Island, stopping at British Landing, and they had a picnic, included cold pigeon pie, which was common back then, probably passenger pigeon. Uh, and he wrote that they made their way through the woods to the cave. So they went on this very infrequented trail through the woods, and it said at length, arriving to where, almost hidden by trees and rising from a mound of earth, decaying leaves and vegetation, a great mass of rock appeared, inside which, hollowed out by nature, is a small cave, spacious enough to stand up in, rough, damp, and rocky. 'Tis known as Scott's Cave from its discoverer. So, very likely named after this man, Captain Martin Scott. He was the commandant at Fort Mackinac at this time period, well, just before Waud and Mr. Butler Gunn came to visit. From 1842 to 1845, he was commandant of Fort Mackinac. And he was the first one to make any concessions for tourists. So, one of the quotes about him is this gallant, active, and gentlemanly commander of the garrison beautifies, adorns, and improves everything which comes under his care. For example, he used lime whitewash to mark the path out to Arch Rock so visitors could find their way. Again, this is 30 years before the national park was even founded. But he was also interested in trails. He had a number of hunting dogs. He was very active and constantly outside. And he was very well respected, a wonderful commander and very well liked. And visitors who would come would go up to the fort and visit him, and there's many accounts of him. He was killed 2 years after he left Fort Mackinac in the Mexican-American War near Mexico City. on September 8th, 1847. So before his death, we always see it just written as like Indian Cave or something like that. But then by 1853, it's called Scott's Cave, probably in his memory. And in fact, it was said that no braver or better officer fell in the Mexican War. He was shot leading his troops into battle. So by 1870, which is almost National Park Days, here's a map, a little bit inaccurate, but it shows, a handful of features, including Scott's Cave up near the north side there. It says it mislabels it western. Near the northwestern point of the island is Scott's or Flynn's Cave. To find this, we turn a few rods this side of British Landing and follow an infrequented trail through the woods. A stranger should not attempt this journey without a guide. Those intending to visit this cave should provide themselves with a lamp or candle, but as an occasional ray of sunlight can penetrate its hidden chamber. And Flynn's cave probably relates to a soldier at Fort Mackinac who was actually murdered, and that's a whole nother story, but this is the only spot we've ever seen it labeled Flynn's Cave. So here's Dwight Kelton's book again, and you can see Scott's Cave, and also something weird, Ruggles Pillar. Mr. Kelton renamed features of Mackinac Island, including this, which we call Friendship's Altar, Sugarloaf, all these things after businessmen, after men of the Central Michigan Central Railroad and the steamship companies and things like that, because he was trying to flatter them. So they did not keep those names for long. And Ruggles Pilter turns back into Friendship's Altar. A journey about finding Scott's Cave was written by another woman author from Sheboygan. Her father was a lumberman there, and it was Elizabeth Smith. She privately published her journal in 1899, or 1889, excuse me. She writes about visiting the location on August 30th, 1887. We took a long drive by way of British Landing towards Scott's Cave. We saw Ruggles Pillar, a rock standing near the road with trees growing out of it. So here's a stereoptic view of Friendship's Altar. We could imagine that's her with her nephew standing up on top there. And here's a picture of it today that I took. Just a little breccia stack, very similar to Sugarloaf, but much smaller. And the road goes right by there and curves around towards Scott's Cave. But she writes, we could not, on account of the roads, reach the cave, but my nephew scaled the steep hillside and brought trophies of moss and ferns, which I afterward pressed for a memento book. So here's a nice mossy rock from Mackinac Island. So it's always noted that its entrance was very low. This is a really kind of a more famous lithograph of it that appeared in many publications that were published by these railroad and steamship companies. They said, once inside, a giant Goliath may stand erect. A most peculiar sensation comes over one on entering the dim cavern, and unless provided with a candle or lantern, the visitor will find himself in almost total darkness. Here's a sailor kind of scrambling into or out of the cave. So the entrance is actually a bit lower than that lithograph that we saw. In fact, this gentleman here in 1915 was a little more on the portly side, and he mentions, I humbly bowed low on Mother Earth, and with strenuous effort wormed my way through the narrow doorway of the cave. Once I thought I was stuck, but an edge of scissors wiggles carried me through, and I found myself in darkness like unto that of the everlasting pit. He did not enjoy his visit. But many people did, even through the 1940s. Here's a picture from the 1940s. This is the last known image taken of Scott's Cave, and actually a geological publication in 1945. Mackinac Island had its own newspaper then called the Mackinac Island News. And this little piece here, they even mention that there's a ledge to sit on, the ceiling is 10 feet high, and that stalactites once formed in this cave on the high ceiling, but were broken off and carried away by souvenir collectors. So it was even an active cave at one point. It would just sculpt it out as the lake levels were higher, and it hollowed out this uh, opening inside the harder brecciated stack that was around it. So it's interesting and fun to explore the cave and study the rock formations, but too damp and gloomy to sit down and while the hours away. So what happened to Scott's Cave? What happened, we think, again, it's a little bit fuzzy, but there was a huge storm in the winter of 1952, and ice washed up on the shoreline and really destroyed the exterior road in several places, similar to what water did in 2020 here not long ago. But this newspaper article briefly mentions that huge ice cakes washed onto the shore in a Lake Huron storm and blocked Mackinac Island's East Road. So the state park superintendent said the road would be out of service the rest of the winter. And from what we have heard since then, um, Scott's Cave was dynamited to get limestone to fix the road. So this map from just a few years after this shows Scott's Cave is still as a visiting location to number 12, but at that point it had already been altered to a great extent. So 1953, it was blasted, and it was taken off maps and it was pretty much forgotten about. There's a Scott's Cave Road, and even that is just renamed Scott's Road at this point. But if you really kind of take your maps seriously, you go off trail. Was the cave really lost forever? Perhaps, in a way, it wasn't. Let's take a look. So again, this is last November that I finally found the location of Scott's Cave. Several other people that I've seen in the past have mislabeled the current location, but this is what it looked like in 1853. This is what it looks like today. Now, you can see the front is a little bit different. And what happened was the entire front face of it was blown off. So there's some big rocks that are on the ground in front of the cave, but the stack is still there. The front entrance is all collapsed entirely. You can't see any way into it whatsoever. And it's really kind of impossible to know if there's still a chamber underneath the ground. There very well may be. But because so much of the stack is left, I really kind of doubt the legend of it being used for limestone to fix the road. Um, Perhaps it was a convenient excuse. Maybe people were doing bad things out there, or park didn't want to have responsibility for it. We really don't know. It's kind of lost in time. It's long enough ago now. It was not written down, but there is quite a bit of the stack on top of what was Scott's Cave still there and not far from the trail if you know where to look. There are other caves that are still on Mackinac Island that can still be explored. Eagle Point Cave is kind of between Scott's Cave Road or Scott's Road and Tranquil Bluff Trail on top of the hill here. It's really just kind of scooped out. Took this picture from inside it last fall. It's not that large. Another one that's very well known is Cave of the Woods. This is actually a much older cave when the lake levels were so high that they were actually lapping up in the interior of Mackinac Island, kind of in the center of the island near the airport. And again, it's just a scoop, and the bottom picture is me inside it looking out. But actually, at least Cave of the Woods was very likely a location that was used for native burials at one point in time. All right, we're going to continue our journey around the island. So we started on the southeast side, we went to the northeast side. Now we're going to go around the top and come all the way down to the western shore. And I've circled Chimney Rock here. And again, there's another perfect example of something that has deteriorated over time. It was not dynamited, thankfully, but it did suffer some collapse, which you will see. And it's been pretty much forgotten about. And then another feature nearby has been misnamed Chimney Rock. So even if some people think they've been to it, they've probably been to the wrong spot. It was once very famous. This brief note from 1860 just says that it's well repays the trouble of a visit with other points of interest on the island. It was tall. Thomas McKenney wrote the first note of it that we've ever been able to find. He visited Mackinac Island in 1826. In fact, he was actually one of the early ones to actually visit it by land as well, because it was so close to the shore for so many years, you really had to access it by boat. But in August of 1826, almost exactly 200 years ago, he goes on horseback, goes through the center of the island, and went to British Landing, which is in the kind of the northwest shoreline, north of this point. And he said that after visiting British Landing, they rode around the western and southern shores of the island and saw the Chimney Rock, which is pretty much like the one at Harper's Ferry of the same name, and it stands like that on the side of a hill. It is like that also a body of stones which happen to have been supported by resting on one another in the hill, which once embosomed them. But the earth and looser particles having been washed away, these now stand out exposed to the view. I suppose this chimney rock to be about 50 feet high. So he's right about what it looks like. It was described as a slender spire, and this is an exaggerated view of it from picturesque America. But it was actually 131 feet tall. It was not 50 feet tall. So it's this tall, slender spire. As the lake levels were higher, it scooped out all the rock around it and left this standing, very much like Sugarloaf in the center of the island. In 1865, a visitor who wrote in the Detroit Free Press also called it Grand Medicine Rock, which was not very often done. This is really the only time I've seen that. But they describe it as a natural chimney standing out some distance from the main cliff. It's customary for exploring parties to make a fire here and watch the smoke ascend through the rock in curling clouds. A little bit later, in 1882, it just mentioned the Chimney Rock is a slender, finger-like spire of stone, 131 feet in height. It's a little more accurate representation. We'll take a little closer look at it. You can see it there on the left, and at the top is Skull Cave, and then just a view along the shore. Notably, though, in 1882, in the Annals of Fort Mackinac book, which you've seen several times, it noted that both Devil's Kitchen, which is easily visited today, and Chimney Rock are easier reached by boat. And the water level was very high at that point. So if you think back to the beginning, we saw Maiden's Rock and we saw Fairy Arch and the giant stairway, the water was right up to the edge. But by 1900, the water had receded, so the road could be built and added on. So let's take a look here. There's a very early view of it, a photograph, probably the first one that was published that we have found. Plyman Green or PB Green took this right after the national park was founded. Here's a close-up. It's so the water is in the very front. It's just kind of a really bright color. There's a little bit of stone, but mostly that's water there. All these thick trees and shrubs, and then you can see this. It doesn't look very slender here, but it's just so covered with all kinds of vegetation. I do want us to kind of keep track of this tree. So I've circled a tree on here. There's one here on the right, and then there's actually another one on the left that's white. You'll see that disappears pretty quickly. But we're going to keep our eye on this twisted cedar tree that I've circled here when we look through these next views. So this Henry Rossiter was another Mackinac Island photographer. He was based on Mackinac Island. He had a studio there, and he took some excellent views of it. Again, you can see the beach in the front. There's a label here as well, but there's the beach in the front. There's also a woman standing on the shoreline and a man standing right near in the center of the rock, right next to that dark green vegetation. And again, above his head, quite a ways, is this tree that we're going to follow. And you can see it is more of a slender spire. You can see how it extends on up above the tree there as well. And this is the best view we had. Same photographer, taken about 1895, before the road goes around the island. And it simply mentions here in this a book from a few years earlier that Chimney Rock is a very remarkable freak of nature. So just that's kind of really notable, stood out right along the shoreline. So even if you were just taking a boat tour around the island, you'd easily see it. It stood up and it was very tall and slender. And there's our tree we're following. So, Lakeshore Drive was completed along the western shore in the autumn of 1896. So, like I said, maybe just about 1900 or 1904, it's finally completed all the way around the island. But this is a just a private person who visited the island in August of 1898 and snapped this photo. So, the water levels come down quite a bit. There's actually a line here that's the road. So, there's some vegetation and then water here in the foreground. But you can see Chimney Rock in the back there. Yep, there's our tree again. And look how high up it looks. You can see that big bulge on the left-hand side as well. We're going to really keep an eye on this formation. It's especially standing back, you can really kind of see the height of it. Much taller than that pine tree that's on the left there. William Gardner was one of our most famous early photographers on the island. This is a picture printed in a book that he took, but we have many glass plate negatives of from his studio that have been preserved as well. And here's our tree way up there. I just found this picture 1 or 2 weeks ago, and the reason it didn't pop out in all our other research is because it's mislabeled historically. So if you up at the top, it says Lover's Leap, Mackinac, Michigan. So Lover's Leap is another formation that's on private property further to the south towards town, but this is Chimney Rock. It's just very clear. Everything is exactly the same. It's that formation. It's a large format postcard, which we actually do not have in our collection, but it was for sale online at one point, and this picture, this copy of it popped up. So it was taken about 1910 or so. We're on the lookout to see if we can find one for our collection, and you can see a man with a horse and buggy in the foreground. It's another book picture. Looks the same, lots of vegetation down in the front. 1912. And now we come to this. Now, if you've been to any of my other programs, I did a program about Ivan Swift for you last fall, and I actually showed this picture because this was written by a young woman named Florence Fuller. Her father, George Fuller, was part of the Michigan Historical Commission, and he actually wrote a letter to Ivan Swift of Harbor Springs asking for advice for the cover of this little map and guide of Mackinac Island. So he said he was writing it, but his daughter ended up being the credited author. So she probably worked with him. She was a college student at the U of M at that time. And Ivan did not do the sketch, but he offered some ideas about it and who could provide a good sketch. So in this book, Florence writes about Chimney Rock. She mentions that it's a limestone pinnacle above West Shore Drive, resembling a huge chimney, one of the most remarkable natural formations in North America. But notably, she also says about 50 feet of this rock fell recently, crumbling under the weathering of years. What happened? So, we'll see what happened here in a few minutes. But so that's 1926. So here's the 1940s now. This is a geological map of Mackinac Island, and I've circled Chimney Rock here along the shore and Sunset Rock just to the south. And several geological trips, especially college trips, but also this other larger report, note all these features, these sea stacks they're called, these chimney-like formations along the shoreline, and they point out Chimney Rock and Sunset Rock. Now, today, like I mentioned, Chimney Rock has disappeared from the maps. Sunset Rock is a popular tourist destination right near Stone Cliff Resort, which is they're the inn at Stone Cliff, which is a hotel. Mackinac State Park has recently got ownership of Sunset Rock, and actually just this last fall, we got another 16 acres of land that will connect this little landlocked piece to our roads and pathways in the rest of the state park. So before you could access it by going across Stonecliff property, but this year we're going to build a trail so everyone can visit that location. But it is not Chimney Rock. They're two separate things. What happened to Chimney Rock? We can actually see it today much more closely than we can Sunset Rock. Here's a map from 1956, really just to point out that it's gone. So it would be right here, kind of in the center of the photo near the Cay and Lake, and that's where it should be. But the Mackinac Bridge also opened about this time, and there's an article in the Sault Ste. Marie newspaper, the Evening News, that mentions that people had been predicting Arch Rock's collapse and disappearance for many years, but it was still solid and apparently a permanent fixture, and we hope that is true. It looks fine. But they also noted that Chimney Rock, a towering limestone pinnacle on the other side of the island, created much in the same way, partially collapsed a number of years ago. And it was kind of lost to time, really since the 1950s. So really remarkable that it's been forgotten in so recent times. Now, it's bizarre, but there was a ski hill on Mackinac Island for like 2 years, really only one active year, by Rex Humbard, the televangelist. He wanted to open this play and pray resort, they called it. And we have a very small number of pictures of the ski hill. There's Lake Huron in the background. St. Ignace is in the way in the background. And here's the ski lift. And that year, that the ski hill was created, they were taken to court by the state park because all this fill from creating this nice smooth hill, they piled along the lake shore here. It is shocking to realize that this is the same location we've been looking at, and all the other pictures of Chimney Rock, in just this wide, flat beach, is all this fill that this aid dumped in the lake. I was looking at this picture just randomly and noticed in the background Chimney Rock. So here is kind of the middle portion of it. Here's the upper portion of it with this twisted tree that we've been looking at that was way up over the heads of people standing next to it, and it collapsed. The base of it crumbled, and this lower portion now, which is right next to the road, was once many feet above our heads, and it slid down the hillside, and the tree took a ride with it, and it's still there. Here's a picture from 2000. So this photographer is standing right along the lakeshore. He's from Traverse City, and he's looking up. The ski hill's on the right. The road is right in front of him, and there's Chimney Rock. That's the twisted tree right there. And then I stood there and took some pictures of it as well. So if we compare the two, this is that great photograph from about 1895. This middle section here is what's now lying right next to the road. It fell down the bluff and tilted a little bit to the left. And there's a tree. And you can transpose the historic photograph right over the modern one, and they line up exactly. You can see this little kind of beak feature here, this big bump on the left, and I really did a deep dive and compared many different points on both formations, and they're exactly the same. And here's a close-up of the tree. Even in some of the early lithographs with the tree, 50 feet up above our heads, you can see the little tiny hole in the center of it. And right now, the right half of it is dead, but the left half is still alive. And it's probably hundreds of years old, growing on bare rock and slightly tilted from its original position when it was growing high above our heads. All right, last one. So this isn't exactly a geological feature, although it's a hill, and it has to do with cows. So one thing I will guarantee, if you go to Mackinac Island today, you will not see a single cow unless you're in a restaurant and you're eating one. But at one time, 200 years ago, Chandler Gilman wrote that there are more cows in Mackinac than any other place of its size in the known world. And every cow wears at least one bell. And that's because he was staying at a boarding house downtown, and the cowbells woke him up very early in the morning. So there's this place called Listening Hill, and we're going to see how that relates to cows here in a minute. But let's briefly take a look at how cows got to the island. So if you think about it, we go back even further to when Fort Mackinac was first constructed in 1780. If soldiers wanted milk, if they wanted beef, then these fresh things, they had to have gardens, they had to have livestock. And believe it or not, on November 10th, 1780, Lieutenant Alexander Harrow, commander of the HMS Welcome, wrote that they As day got underway, they worked over from Mackinac Island to Old Michilimackinac by noon, loaded the vessel, and took two cows on board for the island. So there I put them right there on the boat. So they sailed them over there. Some were even put over the previous winter. They were walked across the ice at the winter of 1779 over to Mackinac Island so the British soldiers could have cattle. So where they put them was a place right below Fort Mackinac. You can see all those livestock down here. This is now the Jewel Grand Hotel Golf Course. And this is a sketch from 1838. And it was called the public pasture or the government pasture for many, many years. And here it is on a map from 1855. I've outlined it here. There's a little pond, there's a stream that runs down from the hill, and this was the pasture where many of the cows were, especially the ones for the fort. But similar to the soldiers, if you wanted fresh milk, if you wanted beef, you could have your own cow. Even people who lived in town did, and there were a few scattered farms around the island as well. These are some pretty famous pictures. This is the Grand Hotel Golf Course in the foreground, or the government pasture. There's Fort Mackinac on the hill in the back, and that's Trinity Episcopal Church, right at the base of the fort ramp over there on the right. Here they are again. It's about 1900 or so. So Fanny Corbusier was the wife of the post surgeon who came to Mackinac in 1882. And she wrote her memoirs, which were published. And she wrote, the people on foot who came to visit the island usually climbed the long flight of steps that were the shortest way up. And a cow once chose this route, climbing till she reached the parade ground some 120 steps up. And I would have loved to have seen that. Poor thing. And you see at the base of the ramp, there's this kind of entryway, and that isn't so to prevent people from entering the fort. That's so cows don't go up the ramp. And at one time, there was a turnstile at the bottom of the ramp, even before that bigger picture was taken. And again, it's to prevent cattle from wandering up the ramp because they just wandered all over the place. A great account of cows, and now we're going to get to Listening Hill itself, was written by this lovely woman, Frances Margaret Fox. So she was a children's book author. Her first book, Farmer Brown, came out in 1901, and she wrote many books, many articles for children. Folks around here particularly know her for Little Mossback Amelia. It's based on a real family story that they were mossbacks or settlers that came and lived near the Charlevoix area. She spent time in Mackinac City. The streets of Mackinac City are named for historical characters because of her recommendation. These used to just be numbers or letters. She had a house in Mackinac City called Happy Landing. It's still there, owned by someone else now. Her final wish in 1959, before she passed away, is that her ashes were scattered in a lake near her beloved home. So they were. And she also spent many winters in Washington, D.C., and then summers up here. But many of the stories, like Mossback Amelia and some others, were gathered from her talking with old residents to get ideas for stories to share. So one of these came out in an article that I just stumbled across in the Sunday School Times, printed in Philadelphia in 1936. And it was in a section called Children at Home, and she called it The Listening Hill at Mackinac. And she noted here the author writes that this was told her at Mackinac Island, Michigan, by a happy old lady with bright blue eyes who once was a child at Listening Hill. So here's an old lady on Mackinac Island, probably not the person who we're talking about. She may even be a Native American resident, but she's a nice, happy old lady. So let's briefly go through, and I'll show you some pictures, not related to the story especially, but related to cows on Mackinac Island. This is just a really short excerpt of her larger tale. And it's the last thing we'll finish with today. At Mackinac Island in the long ago, nearly every family in the village owned a cow, and nearly every cow was a pet and wore a cowbell around her neck. Here's a cow standing in the road, in Fort Mackinac in the background. After the cows were milked in the morning, they were turned loose to wander all day, here, there, and everywhere, along the shores of the blue lake, and through the woods of the beautiful island. And all these pictures you'll see are taken on Mackinac Island. And here's a cow, Sugarloaf. Just grazing in front of the Sugarloaf. You can actually see there was a staircase that went up to the cave in it at one point. Late in the afternoon, the village children, boys and girls together, used to go after their cows. And here's some grazing on the east bluff, near the big cottages or big mansions along the east side of the island, with a grand hotel far in the background. And at that time of day, although the cows were scattered, they were never far apart. And here's the Mission House, where I lived for 5 years. This employee housing today. It was built as a mission school for Native Americans in 1825, and there's cows out in the front yard. It was a hotel for many years. Not far from the white fort on the bluff was a high hill, and there every afternoon the children gathered on the hilltop to listen for their own cowbells. In time, they named the lovely spot Listening Hill. It was a soft, grassy green hill where blue harebells grew and pink wild roses, and the children loved it. And these, of course, are daisies. Sometimes they put their heads down on the ground to get the sound of their cowbells more clearly and the direction from which the sounds came. This was labeled Bessie, Daisy, and Beauty in Clover, 1883. This is the farm out in the northern part of Mackinac Island, and they had bells around their neck. The cowbells were all different, which made it easier for every child to find the family cow. Now, the story continues from here, and it talks about all the different children recognizing the sound of their own cowbell, and when they heard it, they would rush off through the woods and find their cow and lead it home for the evening. And this old couple, this French couple, lived on the island. Not the same old lady we saw before. She was a child at this point. But she remembered this older couple lived on Mackinac Island. They had no children of their own. But the old woman tied a little silver tea bell to her cow's neck, and all the children came to recognize the tea bell and call venez, venez for in French for the cow to come, and that cow would always make it home first with this little tea bell tinkling along the way. It's just a really delightful story. And this picture is taken right behind Fort Mackinac. This is in the state park era, so this is probably some state park staff in the 1890s or about 1900. And they have a cow, and it's just the best cow. Look how shiny it is. And it's got this wonderful bell around its neck. And there's these girls and their dog. And I hope you saw the kitten on the porch. I'll go back. There's a kitten on the porch drinking milk. Just a delightful picture. So after supper, after the cows were milked, the children knelt by their beds, said their prayers, and put their heads on their pillows, and their mothers tucked them under the covers. Alone under the stars, the listening hill always serenely waited for the dawn of another happy day, and the coming of the children after their cows at sunset time at Mackinac Island in the long ago. So that's a nice story. But where was Listening Hill? I searched and searched and searched. I found a newspaper article about Cowbell Point, which was told by some carriage drivers in the 1880s to national park visitors. It was probably the same location. They really made a lot of puns and jokes about things, but I could not find Listening Hill on a single map, not on a state park map, not on a survey map, not on anything until I was going through our archive, looking through drawers, and this gigantic map, a topographical map, written probably about 1915, and pencil marks are all over it. You can see garbage dump, crack in the island up here, and Listening Hill is written on here. So there's one other person who references Listening Hill, um, an author in the Mackinac Island Town Crier, and it's just something that was known by local people where this was, and it just has faded away. A big reason is, if you look at this location today, it's right here where Annex Road goes to the airport. There's Mackinac Island Airport. Stone Cliff is on the left. This is Stone Cliff Road coming off here, and it's completely and utterly wooded. You would never think that a pleasant grassy hill with harebells and other flowers where children would gather. But if you look at a LiDAR image, which strips away the trees, you can actually see the hill that goes right through this area. And if you're on your bike, you can definitely feel it as you ride up Annex Hill, but it's all wooded today. And this portion of the island was once several small farms. So it was definitely some of this is a more private property, and also towards the south is the Grand Hotel, and that was also the David Mitchell farm. So the children that lived in the village would kind of come up the hill. They would gather in this spot, and they would stand on Listening Hill. So today we know where it was, and you can visit that spot, especially if you come on the bike ride that I'm going to lead, and we can imagine these stories of long ago, even if the physical remains aren't exactly what they once were. And this is just a scant beginning, even though we've talked however long, of all the different features, the musical well that was once there, the twin sister rocks, which I've been able to find out in the middle of the woods, and other things that are no longer there, but were once commonly known on Mackinac Island. Oh, the end. And here's Fairy Arch. The fairy's making Fairy Arch, one of the Annals of Fort Mackinac books. So I hope you visit the parks this year. Again, it's a special year for us. We've got 150 years of Mackinac National Park. There's actually a documentary movie that's going to be coming out about that as well. And the new exhibits in the soldiers barracks, all kinds of things are being updated. So it's just a really great year to visit the parks. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have now.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. My favorite part was the cows, not gonna lie.
You're
We
welcome.
do have a few questions. If you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat. We would love to see those. We did have someone, Dawn mentioned that she has her mother's first edition copy of Little Mossback, uh,
Oh,
Amelia, Little Mossback Amelia, I think it is,
yeah, Amelia.
which
Oh, that's great.
I know, it's so cute. Let's see. Uh, you mentioned
My
Robinson's Folly. What is it and how was it named?
Okay, Robinson's Folly is a large cliff face on the southeast side of Mackinac Island, near what we call Mission Point. There's Mission Point Resort, Mission House is over there, and it's just a large exposed cliff face. So it was named because there's this kind of legend of a British soldier with the last name of, actually his name is Robertson. It was kind of changed over the years to Robinson. And he falls in love, and there's this whole kind of drawn out tale about it. And his little cabin they had built up there falls off the edge of the cliff. So there's many versions of that. But we wrote a whole vignette. We have this whole publication series of magazines and other books, and there's a whole vignette written just about Robinson's Folly and it's how it got its name and all that. But it's one of these exposed cliff faces all the way around Mackinac Island, including the cliff face which Fort Mackinac itself was built upon. That was made when the lake levels were once very much higher after the glaciers left. And that cliff face was sculpted about the same time Arch Rock was being hollowed out, about 4,000 years ago or so. So long before Mr. Robinson fell in love and had his cottage up there.
I had a couple questions that I'm not seeing in chat, but one of them is, was there any, it was a national park and then a state park
Mhm.
before those two amazing sites were dynamited. Did they do any sort of archaeological excavation at all?
No, archaeology was not done that way in a formal way in that early time. No. Archaeology is like really the modern era of archaeology and museum work at Mackinac began in the 1950s. Really, very close to about the same time the Mackinac Bridge was built. And since that time, and that's when archaeology started at Colonial Michilimackinac on the mainland. But archaeology on the island is even less frequent. And often like I mentioned, many of those grave sites, for example, were just looted and picked up as, souvenirs by visitors. So a few of the remains that were taken were actually repatriated. Some of them were like donated to the Smithsonian and things like that, even by soldiers. And they were brought back to the island and reburied. But then other things just kind of disappeared. But since the 1950s, especially on public lands, there have been a variety of archaeology projects that we have done, and that's a whole um, other bigger topic, but not very much overall.
Are there any interpretive tours or walks offered, let's see, during Lilac Festival? I'm not
Yes,
sure
we
when
do.
you're.
It's in June. I think it's like the 7th to the 15th or somewhere around that time. And I always lead a lilacs and warblers birding walk during that time. We meet at the Father Marquette statue, and there are actually a couple others as well. And a really easy way to see all of our programs is to go on our Facebook page, Mackinac State Historic Parks, or on our website, MackinacParks.com. And our whole list of events is there, including ones during Lilac Festival. And I am going to lead myself two programs per month, starting with a May Day Wildflower Walk on May 1st and going all the way until the fall through September. And then other staff leads different walks and bike rides and things as well.
Oh, that sounds lovely. I need to visit the island. Let's see. Someone wrote, oh, just to me. Oh, what is your favorite of the natural formations on Mackinac, current or vanished?
Huh. Well, it is hard to beat Arch Rock just for the sheer grandeur of it and the delicate nature of it. But the best time to go is when other folks aren't there. There's so many times where it's really busy, especially when the large carriage tours stop. But one of the favorite things for Victorian tourists to do is visit it during the full moon and to watch the full moon rise through the arch. And at night, or many other times in the winter. I even was on a ferry once in the winter. We had to go all the way around the island because the waves were so bad. They didn't want to cut straight across. So we went right by Arch Rock in the winter on the ferry, which was just a magical thing. It was fantastic. Um, but they're just, each one is so special and it's in various ways. Something like Eagle Point Cave is much more hidden and unknown, so not as many people go there. Or even cracking the island and some of those things as well. Um, Lately, though, I've really had a bee in my bonnet about Chimney Rock because it was so tall and so famous for so long. And I mean, it's on maps and everything, things were shifted over and it was mislabeled that Sunset Rock and Chimney Rock were the same thing. And people literally could reach out and touch Chimney Rock if they're walking around the island or riding their bike and no one knows it's there. Like you folks are about the only people that know it's there. I wrote a blog post on it, so if you do go on our website, you can find more detail and see some of the more point comparisons and whatnot. We're going to republish it and kind of start to spread the word a bit. It's on private property actually, but it's right on the road. And the top part of it isn't up there anyway. It's right near us, so that's one of the other's favorites for sure.
That was incredible how you tracked the tree through its movements. And that tree has hung on for so long.
Yeah, it's
That
an
was
absolutely amazing.
that was a little bit crazy. Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions? Oh, what's your favorite place to eat on Mackinac Island or Mackinac City, Kyle?
Well, the best view is at the tea room at Fort Mackinac because you get to sit right there at the fort and overlook the whole Straits of Mackinac. When my wife and I go to visit the island and go to do programs or whatnot, we often find ourselves at the Ice House, which is kind of tucked away. It's right behind the Island House Hotel. There's a sign on the main street that just points with an arrow, and you go up between the yacht club and the Island House, and in the back there's this whole like courtyard out back. And it's called an ice house because there was an ice house that's still there that they don't use for ice anymore. But it's great because it's a little hidden, it's outdoor seating, they have great food, and it's not nearly as crowded as some of the other places downtown. So that's a little secret for you.
Yes, from insiders. I love it.
Yeah. And also the Woods restaurant out at Stonecliff. It's a very magical place. It's more fancy. That building out at Stonecliff was built as a playhouse for the children of the family. And you wouldn't, it's bigger than my own house. But they had a stage in there and all that, and it's got really great food and a little miniature bowling alley in there. So definitely check that out too. And Stonecliff is just completely renovated, and the company that runs that actually donates all of the proceeds that they make for nonprofit charity work. So it's really quite an incredible thing that they've got going there. So definitely head out there if you get a chance.
Fantastic. Just some other lovely comments that I will let you read on your own there, Kyle. But um,
Thank you.
thank you so much for doing this presentation and bringing this history to light. Like you said, probably no one but us now know about Chimney Rock. Next time I
Yeah,
visit, I'll have to. I'm gonna look for that tree.
definitely. It's there. It's waiting for you. Been there hundreds of years.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. We will get a recording link of this lecture sent out to you in case you missed anything at the beginning or the end, and we encourage you to sign up for our other presentations that we have coming up. Follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, on our website. You can find us at all those places and get in touch. We'd love to see you at some of our other programs this summer and maybe on Mackinac Island. Have a
Yeah,
good night,
thanks.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.